Welcome to History Uncovered, where we delve into the stories and events that have shaped our world. In this episode, we're turning back the pages of time to the Elizabethan era, to the bustling streets of London, to the hallowed halls of the Globe Theatre. We're journeying into the life and times of a man whose name is synonymous with drama, poetry, and the English language itself. A man who, through his quill, painted portraits of humanity that have endured for over 4 centuries. Yes, dear viewers, today we're embarking on a journey into the life, the works, and the enduring legacy of none other than William Shakespeare. Known as the Bard of Avon, Shakespeare's influence on literature, culture, and our understanding of the human condition is immeasurable. His plays and sonnets have been translated into every major living language and are performed more often than those of any other playwright. From the tragic love story of Romeo and Juliet, the political machinations in Julius Caesar, to the introspective Prince Hamlet's existential musings, Shakespeare's works have touched every corner of human emotion and experience. But who was the man behind these timeless works? What was his life like in a time of plague, political intrigue, and burgeoning exploration? Join us as we uncover the life of William Shakespeare, a man of many faces, a playwright, a poet, an actor, and a shareholder. A man who continues to shape our world from beyond the grave, through the power of his words and the depth of his understanding of the human spirit. Stay tuned as we delve into the world of this literary titan, here on History Uncovered. Born into a world of glovemaking and local politics, William Shakespeare was the son of John Shakespeare, an alderman and successful glover from Snitterfield, Warwickshire, and Mary Arden, a woman of considerable means from a landowning family. The third of 8 children, and the eldest surviving son, Shakespeare was baptized on the 26th of April, 1564, in the quaint market town of Stratford-upon-Avon. His actual birth date remains a mystery, but it is traditionally celebrated on St. George's Day, the 23rd of April, a date that holds a certain poetic symmetry, as it is also the day he died in 1616. Shakespeare's early education, while not documented, is believed to have taken place at the King's New School in Stratford, a free school chartered in 1553. Here, he would have received an intensive education in Latin grammar and the classics, a foundation that would later echo through his works. At the tender age of 18, Shakespeare took a wife, Anne Hathaway, who was 8 years his senior. They were granted a marriage license on the 27th of November, 1582, and soon after, and gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Susanna. The couple would later have twins, Hamlet and Judith. Tragically, Hamlet would die at the age of 11, a loss that is speculated to have deeply affected Shakespeare. Following the birth of his twins, Shakespeare's life enters a period known as the Lost Years, from 1585 to 1592. Little is known about this time, and many stories, such as his supposed flight from Stratford to escape deer poaching charges, are largely based on hearsay and conjecture. What we do know is that by 1592, Shakespeare had emerged on the London theatre scene. His early career was not without controversy. In 1592, playwright Robert Greene referred to him as an upstart crow, accusing him of overreaching his station by attempting to match the works of university-educated writers. Despite this, Shakespeare's reputation continued to grow, and by 1594, his plays were performed exclusively by the Lord Chamberlain's Men, a company in which he was a shareholder. This company would later become the King's Men under the patronage of King James I. In 1599, the company built their own theatre, the Globe, on the south bank of the River Thames. Shakespeare's association with the company and the success of his plays made him a wealthy man. He bought the second largest house in Stratford, New Place, and invested in a share of the parish tithes. Shakespeare's name began appearing on the title pages of his plays from 1598, a testament to his growing popularity. He continued to act in his own and other plays, with records showing him as part of the cast for several productions. However, his acting career was winding down by 1605. Throughout his illustrious career, Shakespeare split his time between London and Stratford. He lived in various locations in London, including a period in Southwark, where the Globe Theatre was located, and later in an area north of St. Paul's Cathedral, where he rented rooms from a French Huguenot named Christopher Mountjoy. While Shakespeare continued to work as an actor in London as late as 1608, there are records suggesting that he began to retire to Stratford some years before his death. This period of his life was punctuated by frequent visits to London, and he continued to be involved in the city's affairs, including being called as a witness in a court case in 1612. In 1613, he made a significant property purchase in the former Blackfriars Priory, indicating his ongoing ties to the city. However, the bubonic plague, which ravaged London in 1609, and the consequent closure of public playhouses, may have influenced his decision to retire. After 1610, Shakespeare's output as a playwright began to decrease, and by 1613, around the time the Globe Theatre burned down, he had ceased writing completely. His last 3 plays were collaborations, likely with John Fletcher, who succeeded him as the house playwright for the King's Men. Shakespeare passed away on the 23rd of April, 1616, at the age of 52. The cause of his death remains a mystery, with no contemporary sources providing an explanation. He left behind his wife, and his 2 daughters, Susanna and Judith. Susanna had married a physician, John Hall, and Judith had married a vintner, Thomas Quiney. In his will, Shakespeare bequeathed the majority of his substantial estate to his elder daughter, Susanna, with the stipulation that it should pass intact to her first son. His wife, is scarcely mentioned in his will, but he did leave her his second-best bed, a bequest that has sparked much speculation among scholars. Shakespeare was laid to rest in the chancel of the Holy Trinity Church, and his grave carries an epitaph warning against disturbing his bones. A funerary monument was erected in his memory on the north wall of the church, depicting him in the act of writing and comparing him to Nestor, Socrates, and Virgil. Shakespeare's legacy extends far beyond his plays and his hometown of Stratford. He has been commemorated in statues and memorials worldwide, including in Southwark Cathedral and Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. His influence on the English language, literature, and culture is immeasurable, and his works continue to be celebrated and studied more than 400 years after his death. Shakespeare's early works, including Richard III and the 3 parts of Henry VI, were written during a period when historical drama was in vogue. His early plays, which also likely include Titus Andronicus, The Comedy of Errors, The Taming of the Shrew, and The 2 Gentlemen of Verona, were influenced by the works of other Elizabethan dramatists and the traditions of medieval drama. Shakespeare's early classical and Italian comedies, known for their tight double plots and precise comic sequences, evolved into the romantic atmosphere of his most acclaimed comedies in the mid-1590s. A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Merchant of Venice, Much Ado About Nothing, As You Like It, and Twelfth Night are among his most celebrated works from this period. Shakespeare also introduced prose comedy into the histories of the late 1590s, with plays like Henry IV, Parts 1 and 2, and Henry V. His characters became more complex and tender, and his narrative more varied. This period also saw the creation of 2 of his famous tragedies, Romeo and Juliet, and Julius Caesar. In the early 17th century, Shakespeare wrote the so-called problem plays such as Measure for Measure, Troilus and Cressida, and All's Well That Ends Well as some of his best-known tragedies. Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth are considered by many critics to represent the peak of his art. These tragedies often hinge on fatal errors or flaws that destroy the hero and those he loves. In his final period, Shakespeare turned to romance or tragicomedy, completing 3 more major plays, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and The Tempest, as well as the collaboration, Pericles, Prince of Tyre. These plays, less bleak than the tragedies, end with reconciliation and the forgiveness of potentially tragic errors. Shakespeare also collaborated on 2 further surviving plays, Henry VIII and The 2 Noble Kinsmen, likely with John Fletcher. Shakespeare's canon, as we understand it today, includes the 36 plays printed in the First Folio of 1623, which are categorized as comedies, histories, and tragedies. 2 plays not included in the First Folio, The 2 Noble Kinsmen and Pericles, Prince of Tyre, are now accepted as part of the canon, with scholars agreeing that Shakespeare made significant contributions to both. However, it's worth noting that no Shakespearean poems were included in the First Folio. In the late 19th century, Edward Dowden classified 4 of the late comedies as romances. While many scholars prefer to call them tragicomedies, Dowden's term is often used. In 1896, Frederick S. Boas coined the term problem plays to describe 4 plays: All's Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure, Troilus and Cressida, and Hamlet. Boas argued that these plays, singular in theme and temper, could not be strictly classified as comedies or tragedies. The term problem plays has been much debated and sometimes applied to other plays, but it remains in use, though Hamlet is definitively classed as a tragedy. The early years of Shakespeare's career are somewhat murky, and it's unclear for which companies he wrote his initial plays. The 1594 edition of Titus Andronicus reveals that the play had been performed by 3 different troupes. However, following the plagues of 1592–93, Shakespeare's plays were performed by his own company, known as the Lord Chamberlain's Men, at the Theatre and the Curtain in Shoreditch, north of the Thames. The company's popularity soared, with Londoners flocking to see the first part of Henry IV. When a dispute with their landlord arose, the company dismantled the theatre and used its timbers to construct the Globe Theatre on the south bank of the Thames at Southwark. The Globe, the first playhouse built by Actors for Actors, opened in the autumn of 1599, with Julius Caesar being one of the first plays staged. Many of Shakespeare's greatest post-1599 plays, including Hamlet, Othello, and King Lear, were written for the Globe. In 1603, the Lord Chamberlain's Men were renamed the King's Men, reflecting their special relationship with the new King James. They performed 7 of Shakespeare's plays at court between November 1, 1604 and October 31, 1605, including 2 performances of The Merchant of Venice. After 1608, they performed at the indoor Blackfriars Theatre during the winter and the Globe during the summer. The indoor setting, combined with the Jacobean fashion for lavishly staged masks, allowed Shakespeare to introduce more elaborate stage devices. The actors in Shakespeare's company were among the most famous of their time and included Richard Burbage, William Kemp, Henry Condell, and John Hemmings. Burbage played the leading role in the first performances of many of Shakespeare's plays, including Richard III, Hamlet, Othello, and King Lear. The popular comic actor Will Kemp played various roles, including Peter in Romeo and Juliet and Dogberry in Much Ado About Nothing. He was replaced around 1600 by Robert Armin, who played roles such as Touchstone in As You Like It and The Fool in King Lear. In 1613, a cannon set fire to the thatch of the Globe during a performance of Henry VIII, burning the theatre to the ground. This unfortunate event provides a rare pinpoint date for a Shakespeare play. Despite this setback, the King's Men continued to perform and Shakespeare's legacy lived on, his plays continuing to captivate audiences with their blend of drama, comedy, and profound insight into the human condition. While Shakespeare was not universally revered in his lifetime, he did receive considerable praise. In 1598, Francis Mears, a cleric and author, singled him out from a group of English playwrights as the most excellent in both comedy and tragedy. Even in the First Folio, Ben Jonson hailed Shakespeare as the soul of the age, the applause, delight, the wonder of our stage, despite having previously remarked that Shakespeare wanted art. However, between the restoration of the monarchy in 1660 and the end of the 17th century, classical ideas were in vogue, and critics of the time often rated Shakespeare below John Fletcher and Ben Jonson. Thomas Rhymer condemned Shakespeare for mixing the comic with the tragic. Yet, poet and critic John Dryden rated Shakespeare highly, saying of Jonson, "I admire him, but I love Shakespeare." He also famously remarked that Shakespeare was naturally learned. He needed not the spectacles of books to read nature, he looked inwards, and found her there. By the 18th century, critics began to respond to Shakespeare on his own terms and acclaim his natural genius. A series of scholarly editions of his work, notably those of Samuel Johnson in 1765 and Edmund Malone in 1790, added to his growing reputation. By 1800, he was firmly enshrined as the national poet, often referred to as the Bard of Avon or simply the Bard. His reputation also spread abroad, with writers such as Voltaire, Goethe, Stendhal, and Victor Hugo championing his work. During the Romantic era, Shakespeare was praised by the poet and literary philosopher Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and the critic August Wilhelm Schlegel translated his plays in the spirit of German Romanticism. In the 19th century, critical admiration for Shakespeare's genius often bordered on adulation. The Victorians produced his plays as lavish spectacles on a grand scale. The playwright and critic George Bernard Shaw mocked the cult of Shakespeare worship as bardolatry, claiming that the new naturalism of Ibsen's plays had made Shakespeare obsolete. The modernist revolution in the arts during the early 20th century eagerly enlisted Shakespeare's work in the service of the avant-garde. The Expressionists in Germany and the Futurists in Moscow mounted productions of his plays. Marxist playwright and director Bertolt Brecht devised an epic theater under the influence of Shakespeare. The poet and critic T.S. Eliot argued against Shaw that Shakespeare's primitiveness in fact made him truly modern. Eliot, along with G. Wilson Knight and the School of New Criticism, led a movement towards a closer reading of Shakespeare's imagery. In the 1950s, a wave of new critical approaches replaced modernism and paved the way for postmodern studies of Shakespeare. By the 1980s, Shakespeare studies were open to movements such as structuralism, feminism, new historicism, African American studies, and queer studies. Comparing Shakespeare's accomplishments to those of leading figures in philosophy and theology, Harold Bloom wrote, "Shakespeare was larger than Plato and than St. Augustine. He encloses us because we see with his fundamental perceptions." As we close the curtain on the life and works of William Shakespeare, we are reminded of the enduring power of his words and the indelible mark he left on the world of literature. His plays and poems continue to resonate with audiences around the globe, his characters remain etched in our collective consciousness, and his insights into the human condition are as relevant today as they were over 400 years ago. Shakespeare's legacy is a testament to the timeless nature of great storytelling and the universal language of human emotion. His work, steeped in the richness of the human experience, transcends time and culture, reminding us of our shared humanity and the power of the written word. Thank you for watching this episode of History Uncovered. If you found this video informative and engaging, please like and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from the past. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications so that you never miss a new video. In the immortal words of Shakespeare himself, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. So, until our next episode, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep uncovering the stories that make us who we are.